Hello everybody! Today I have for you some Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII 3, and well, this is kind of a weird choice for me right now. Of all the videos I'm choosing to kind of end the year with, I have one more that I'm thinking about making as well, but why Lightning Returns? Well, that's because it just very recently came to PC. It's actually, obviously been out for quite some time on the consoles, but it recently came to PC, and I was somewhat interested to actually try it out, because when I first saw it, back when it was first announced, I thought of it as kind of like a Crisis Core-esque spin-off, and I was kind of interested to see what it was actually like, and I heard a lot of mixed views on it. But a lot of the things I heard and saw actually kind of interested me, because a lot of people were saying it was a really big departure from Final Fantasy XIII, and that's a game I didn't particularly like. So something that departed from it in a lot of ways was actually something that had my interest. So I was waiting for it to come to PC and not sure if it actually would, but eventually we did get FF13 and 13.2. And 13.2 isn't too bad, really, but overall I was just kind of meh from the first two games, so I decided, what the heck, let's give this one a shot, and I was pleasantly surprised, and I think I originally wasn't even going to make a video on it until I really started playing it, and I got to thinking about some things I could say that kind of applied to other games as well. Even actually the video I want to make next, but really, what surprised me was how much different I felt after giving it some good gameplay time, so let's just get into it. What you see in the background is actually recorded before I commentate because of the time limit in the game, which is one of the kind of points of contention for a lot of reviewers back when this first came out, and is something I'll talk about once we kind of get to that point. But the main thing is, in games like this that are very story-driven, I try to avoid main quest lines and things like that, like I'm sure you guys probably know that. But since this game is so time-sensitive, and just like packed with cutscenes and things like you would expect from a Final Fantasy game, I can't really do that in this case, so I decided what I would do instead was record the footage separately, and then edit it into a more watchable form, skip through important long cutscenes, dialogue with story-important characters with big revelations or anything like that, and edit it into a more watchable form without all of that stuff. That way I could play through spoilers, but you wouldn't have to actually see them. That was the best way I could come up with to kind of film the game. And what you're seeing in the background right now is a little bit of customization and stuff like that, and some exploration around the town. The customization in the game is kind of the biggest point of it. That's the whole lightning dress-up simulator joke, because essentially what the customization focuses around are, garbs, outfits. They're just outfits for your character to wear. And most of your stats and abilities come from these outfits, which is a strange way to do things. And basically what you actually are creating through the game are these things called schemata, or schema. And a schema in the game is defined as a combination of a garb, a weapon, a shield, up to 2 accessories, an optional adornment, which is just for looks only, it has no use, no stats or anything like that, and 4 abilities that are equipped. And usually every garb has at least one ability locked to it that you can't take out or swap around. That's kind of part of the personality, I guess you could say, of the garb. And the other 2 to 3 slots are things that you can equip on your own. Although some garbs will have even up to all 4 slots taken up, which is usually kind of a special thing that doesn't happen very often. And like I said, most of your stats actually comes from the garb itself and your weapon. But you'll have noticed through some of the things I was scrolling through there that a lot of the abilities that I was looking through had stats attached to them as well. Abilities in yellow are abilities that have kind of special things attached to them. There's a sort of loot system in the game when it comes to enemy drops, that enemies can drop specific pieces of equipment and specific abilities, and sometimes they'll drop abilities with different statistics attached to them, so they might drop the same ability 3 times, just say a poison spell, and it'll always do the same thing, it'll poison an enemy. Who knew? But what will actually happen is you might get a poison that's yellow, and it'll have, say, magic plus 20 attached to it. So when you equip it to one of your schema, that particular one will have 20 more of its magic stat. And things like that, it'll have a higher duration, so the poison lasts longer. It'll have a stagger duration enhancer and things like that. And the stagger system is very much kind of integral to the combat in this game. I was actually recommended to play the game the first time through on easy, which is something I would normally never ever do, because usually easy is very easy in most games. But you're so underpowered at the start of this game that people said that normal is actually a bit of a slog, and if you want to make a video of it, then you should probably start on easy just to get kind of to the meat of the game a little quicker. I'm kind of glad I started on easy, because it's not an extremely difficult title, but a lot of the earlier fights are a little slow at first, and on easy it makes that less painful. Now, one of the main comparisons I'm probably going to be making through the video is actually to Dead Rising, which might sound really stupid at first because they're totally different games, but we'll get into that in a minute. The other thing you may notice is that there's no level displayed anywhere, and there's no experience gained from battle. That's because there is no experience at all. There's no experience system, there's no level system, there's no leveling up, which is very strange for Final Fantasy because that's very much an RPG staple, and even like weird spin-off Final Fantasies have been able to kind of shove in leveling up in there somewhere. In this case, like I said, a lot of your stats comes from your schema itself. But one thing this game does that's kind of interesting is that your progression is actually done through story progression. Your character progression, as in what you would normally get from levels, is done from completing quests. Every main quest you complete will give you a large boost to your stats permanently. Things like maximum health, strength and magic, maximum ATB, which is what you use in battle for your action bar, very much like how the previous battle systems worked in a turn-based system while building up an ATB meter to act. In this case, you actually have a real-time combat system. And one thing that actually impressed me, first off, was that the mechanics of the battles are, first of all, really good. It's definitely the best battle system that the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy actually has to offer. And it's actually my favorite of the three games, probably, mostly because of that. But it's what they've done with the mechanics, changing them to make them actually fit a real-time battle system. So, I mentioned the stagger mechanic is back, and for those who haven't played the 13 trilogy, any of them, staggering an enemy basically is something you do to them, usually exploiting some kind of weakness that puts them into a very heavily weakened state temporarily, allowing you to do a ton of damage to them. And some enemies take so little damage that they're nigh on impossible to kill without staggering them, and then once you stagger them, they start to take huge amounts of damage. You'll see an example of that late in the video with a couple of enemies I'll fight in the Dead Dunes. One of them kicks the crap out of me. And the idea is that you need to exploit the weaknesses and stagger the enemies to dispatch them more quickly. And if you actually kill an enemy that's staggered, I think it has a higher chance of dropping an ability in this game. But also, the way enemies can be staggered has been enhanced a lot. And that's one of the first things that, as I mentioned, that impressed me. A lot of the new mechanics or changed mechanics show to me that they actually cared about this game, and they actually cared about making changes to make the turn-based mechanics work with a now real-time combat system. It's no longer turn-based. So, for instance, you'll have enemies that need to be staggered by, say, hitting them from behind after they do a charging attack with physical attacks, because, of course, you can actually freely move around now. You don't move around particularly quickly, but you can move in real time. And you may have an enemy that needs you to hit it with lightning while charging up this specific attack, because, of course, since it's real time, you actually have a chance to directly react in the short term to the things enemies are doing. In a turn-based system, reactions are usually done between turns. Like an enemy will be charging up an attack for 1 or 2 turns, and you'll have a chance to attack it then. In this case, it can be done in a much more action-oriented way, and they're actually pulled off fairly well. So what I've actually found is that almost every single enemy in the game actually has, in its stagger mechanics, something like that, something that shows that they actually paid attention to the fact that they're changing the combat system to real time and actually moved the mechanics away from their turn-based roots that were in 13 and 13.2 into something that fits the new mechanical changes. And I wasn't expecting that. I've got to be honest, going into this game I wasn't expecting much at all. I wasn't expecting to like it, and I definitely wasn't expecting to play it as long as I have and actually, well, be enjoying it. I expected to kind of not make a video at all. I just wanted to see what it was like, but it turns out that a lot of the changes are things that I actually like. And I've got to say that the game does a really good job of actually respecting you as a player, if that makes any sense. One of the things that I absolutely hated the most when it came to Final Fantasy XIII was it felt like it didn't respect you as the player. It felt like almost every decision was made for you, the character progression was dumbed down heavily, and it felt like, although you had the 6 roles to switch between, that those roles actually were kind of predefined for you. Which character fit which role best. And although you could definitely switch between them, and that was an important part of the combat, it was very simple, and it felt like a case of the game being kind of polished to a mirror shine. As in, it was so polished that you were given exactly what you needed, exactly when you were going to need it. You didn't have to really think for yourself in battle most of the time. The abilities you would get for each role were very clear in how they were supposed to be used. You would get them in a very specific order, and everyone would come with a very specific sort of package of abilities with their roles, and basically it seemed like that game was meant to be watched more than it was meant to be played. The actual combat definitely took a back seat to the well, I would say exploration, but there wasn't much exploration either. The levels were kind of large, needlessly large. There wasn't much to do in the large levels, unlike a lot of previous Final Fantasies that had large worlds for a reason. Exploration, finding treasures, and mini-bosses, optional super-bosses, all kinds of stuff like that was very important. Final Fantasy XIII didn't have any of that, and that's one of the things I disliked about it the most. I was left feeling very hollow at the end of it. I was left feeling like I was waiting for that point that every FF game has, where it opens up. And you suddenly feel like, alright, wow, there's a lot of stuff I can do now, let's just kind of make some decisions of where I need to go and just start diving into this big world. And it never got to that point. The game just ended, and I was left feeling like that was it, like that was the end, really. After all that, I never felt like it got to that Final Fantasy open up, explore the world, and have fun point. Like it just passed that up completely, and then it was over. And a lot of that came down to the kind of mechanical decisions that were made. In a game with so many battles, I mean, Final Fantasy XIII had a ton of battles. There were lots and lots of them. The battle system was very poor. It was really simple, it was very, very easy, and it didn't feel fleshed out or interesting or like it had much depth at all. So, for a game that was, you know, filled to the brim with battles and bosses and things, most of them felt really lackluster, and the battles were just plain boring, and, you know, that's why the auto-battle button was there. The game has an auto-battle button, if that tells you anything. That tells me that the battles were kind of a side point to the actual story, and I gotta be honest, the story wasn't that interesting to me. Some of the characters were kind of interesting, but the ones they wanted you to focus on, i.e. Lightning and Hope, I couldn't give a crap about. Now, Lightning in this game is a little more interesting to me, because although it says, funnily enough, that she's supposed to not have emotions, I actually found that she's showing a little more emotion and kind of funny dialogue and stuff than she ever did in the first game, and is actually a little more interesting to me. Unfortunately, Hope makes his return in this game, and he is just as annoying as ever, constantly buzzing in your ear telling you what you need to do every half an hour. But he's at least ignorable, and you don't have to have him as part of your party, because, well, you work alone now. And that brings me on to kind of the main point of the game, I think, the point of contention for everyone, the time limit. The game has a fairly strict time limit. The whole tagline of you having 13 days to save the world. You don't actually have 13 days at first. You'll notice when you first start out that it'll say Day 1, 6 days remaining until the end of the world. That's because you can actually fail the game quite easily. If you don't do enough main quests and side quests to harvest what's called Eradia, basically it's like saving souls. You don't actually see it in the footage because I was just trying to screw around and not show any kind of important events in the footage behind me here. But when you complete side quests and main quests, this little soul will float into you and you'll get a bunch of stats, and every day at 6 a.m. you'll return to the Ark, which is your kind of, not so much hub area, it's just an area where you can rest for a minute. Time freezes there, so you don't have to worry about the time limit, you can screw around a bit, and you return this Eradia to Yggdrasil, the Tree of Life. If you get enough, then it will sprout a little bit and you will get an extra day. So for instance, if you do enough on the first day, it'll say at 6 a.m., second day, 6 days remaining. In other words, same number of days remaining as before, but it's a day forward, so you've added an extra day. And you can continue doing this, as long as you continue to complete the quest in a reasonable time frame and don't take too long, and add up to 13 days total to the game. And in fact, there is a way to add a 14th day, which is kind of a special thing that you might not be able to do your first time around if you don't know about it. But it is possible, if you don't do enough of these in time, to fail the game, to run out of days before you actually beat the game. And this is where the comparisons to Dead Rising come in. Dead Rising was also a game that was on a time limit, and that was also a point of contention. Although the game did it very, very well, some people still really didn't like that. Although there was a lot less complaining about Dead Rising's time limit than there is Lightning Returns' time limit. But essentially, they are the same idea. The game is meant to be played through multiple times. It is meant to be completed or not your first time through, and then played again at least one more time, knowing the game better. That is because, if you think in Dead Rising, you're not gonna do everything you can do your first playthrough of that game. It's just not gonna happen. The game has a level system. Level 50 was the max level, I believe. That was absolutely impossible to reach your first 3 days in the game. You cannot do it. And also, if it's your first time playing, especially without a guide or anything, you're not going to know where you should really be all the time. You're not going to know how to find all the survivors. You're not going to be able to actually save them all. You're not going to know all the little nooks and crannies where some of the best weapons and items are held. Like, we all found out about the little katana on top of the awning in the cafe, or the Uzi in the fountain. These are things that you find out that help you, but you don't always find them out in time, and that game was very much meant to be restarted several times and played through again, because of course you keep your progression, as in your levels and things, and you keep your knowledge of the mall. Lightning Returns works in a very similar way. It's possible that you don't complete everything in time and you fail. But when you restart, you don't lose everything. You keep your equipment, your abilities, your schema, and your garbs, your stats that you've gotten from all of your completed quests. You keep everything except for key items, and of course you keep your knowledge of the game, of which side quests take longest, of which enemies drop what materials you'll need for which quests, what people are where and when, because the time matters. Some characters, for instance, may only show up, there's a character with a side quest in Luxarian, the main town, that shows up only around noon. And you gotta talk to him there. And the side quest will only be beginning for you. You can only start it if you actually find the guy in the first place. And he's only in a specific part of town around noon. And this kind of permeates the game. There are tons of side quests, and a lot of them are actually fairly interesting. Because I think one of the best decisions they made was doing the Canvas of Prayers, which is where most of the fetch quests and boring kill quests actually go. They're just on the little bounty board style thing. That allows most of the side quests to actually be much more interesting than they otherwise would be if they were also mixed in with the side quests, if things like fetch quests and things were. Some of them still are pretty easy and uninteresting, but that's because, some of the side quests are meant to be easy to complete. They have a 3-star rating system. Anyone with a side quest will have a little blue star next to their name when you go to talk to them. 1 star is the easiest ones, and 3 stars usually means you gotta kill a pretty difficult monster, or it's a side quest that's going to take several days worth of travels to actually complete. And the game flat out tells you, you're not going to be able to save everyone. You're not going to be able to complete every side quest. And that's somewhat annoying to me at first, because I'm definitely a completionist, especially in RPGs. I like to see everything, collect every item, complete every side quest. That's just what I do. And you can't play the game like that, unfortunately. And I'm not going to say that the time limit is as well done as something like Dead Rising's time limit, or it's just like masterfully crafted, because it's not. But it's not as bad as I thought it would be. the feeling of having this time actually over your head is definitely pressure, and I don't necessarily like it all the time, but because the mechanics actually aid in this time limit, I don't mind as much. So, like I said, since the progression is mostly done through completing quests, as in progressing the game, that's a very anti-grinding measure. In fact, there are several anti-grinding measures in the game, not the least of which there being no levels, so there's no experience to grind. But you're forced, if you want to get stronger, to actually complete the quest lines, which means that the time limit becomes less of an issue because the game actually tells you if you want to get stronger and get better equipment, you need to do quests. You can't just sit around and kill enemies all day. And in fact, some of the other anti-grinding measures are that enemies actually have a limited number of spawns. In this world, new life is born. That includes monsters. So basically, if you kill enough monsters, you can completely extinct that particular race of monsters from the world until your next playthrough, your next sort of New Game Plus. Every different monster species has a different number, and once you kill the required number, say the little niblet things that you saw earlier in the video, those have 120 of them total in the game. And anywhere they spawn, that counts. So if you kill 120 of them, what'll happen is what's called a last one will spawn in place of one of them. The last one always has the capital Omega, Greek letter for Omega, in their name, so it'll be called a Niblet Omega, which is just horrifically threatening sounding. And it'll also have a glowing magenta, kind of like hot pinkish aura to it. It'll also have like 10 times the stats of the normal monster. They get very difficult, and it'll drop better stuff. In fact, the last ones all drop exclusive things, including some magenta-colored weapons and accessories that only they can drop. When you kill the last one, that is literally the last one, and that species of monster will no longer spawn through the entire game. So that's another anti-grinding measure, actually similar to how Dark Souls 2 does it. But there's one more. Monsters will get stronger as the days go on and as Armageddon draws closer, and the various abilities they can drop, says, abilities are very important. They are what you can do in battle. Every schema can equip 4 abilities, and you can have 3 active schema that you can switch to as you please in battle, so that's 12 total abilities for you to use. And what this means is, well, a lot of the monsters only drop the really good abilities later on in the game, which means if you extinct several races of monsters early on, you won't be able to fight them, say, on day 8 or 9 and get the really good versions of the abilities they drop. Maybe it drops Blizzard on day 2 or 3, but if you were to keep some of them alive till day 10, it'll drop a really good enhanced Blizzaga for you, or something like that. That's just how the enemies work. So that's yet another way that the game tells you, hey, don't just sit around in one place and kill enemies all day. That's not how this game is meant to be played. And I feel like the game actually respects me as a player much more than the previous Final Fantasy XIII games did, because it lets me make my own decisions. The customization is very heavy to the game in this case. It's not nearly as shallow as 13 or 13.2's was, although 13.2 did a little bit better than 13 did. But Lightning Return's customization is absolutely integral to how you actually play the game, because combat is actually, first of all, very fun in this case because of its real-time, kind of large variety and nice impact and sound assets, and it's very pretty as well. Obviously, texture quality on a lot of the background props isn't very good, but the actual characters and particle effects and things are quite nice looking, and the enemy models are definitely pretty. And what it all kind of comes down to is, I feel like player choice is very important in this game. The game allows you to take on side quests in the orders that you wish, to ignore ones that maybe would take too long to do some of the easier ones, so that you can harvest more Eradia in one day in order to, that's such a strange word, in order to extend your time. Or you could take the risk-reward route of doing some of the really hard side quests that take a much longer period of time. Now, during the time you're trying to complete them, you probably won't have time to complete the easier ones, but you'll get better rewards, exclusive new garbs with cool abilities and powerful weapons and things like that. And all of this kind of culminates in a game that I feel like actually values me and my choices as a player way more than the previous entries in the 13 trilogy did. And that surprised me. That surprised me a lot, because I didn't actually expect to enjoy this game very much, and I actually am. The story is odd. Yeah, I'm not really going to comment on it too much, because it's very much take it or leave it. If you don't like the story of Final Fantasy XIII, first of all, I don't blame you, but unlike 13 and 13-2, where the story was very much shoved in your face and very much the main point of the game, with auto battle being a obvious choice to just skip past the battles and get to more story. That's very much how the game seemed to want you to play it. In this case, the battles are not skippable. They are integral to the game, and the customization and actual, preparing yourself for the battles is integral to the game. And that means if you want to ignore the story for the most part and just play it as an RPG, you actually can, unlike the previous 2 games in the trilogy, which you kind of couldn't, because the actual story was the main point of those games, with the rest of the game mechanically taking a back seat, which was unfortunate for people like me that don't really like that necessarily. I'm very mechanically focused, and this game actually has much better, more varied, more well-implemented mechanics, I feel, than the previous 2 games in the trilogy. So yeah, I'm actually kind of enjoying it. It has some other interesting mechanics as well, like I mentioned, the idea that you get most of your stats and things from quests. You have to, completing main quests and side quests gives you various statistics, like levels would normally give you. This also adds to the exploration of the game, which is something that the previous 2 sorely lacked. There is more exploration because there are some chests and rare enemies to find, but there's also a lot of side questing and things like that, key items that you need to find, and people that you need to find, more to the point. So exploration is actually much more important in this game than it was in the other 2, which again, it felt kind of like a back burner kind of feature. I really just felt like 13 was a sort of pale imitation of a Final Fantasy game, personally. It was okay, but it all just felt, in the end, like it was going through the motions of what they knew a Final Fantasy game should have, without understanding why those motions were there in the first place. Like, oh, we need big field areas to explore, but they didn't really put much in them. Oh, we need big, impressive boss fights with cool mechanics and varied attacks to fight you. But they don't really require much different strategy from any of the other battles, and you can just auto-battle your way through them. It all felt to me like a pale imitation of what a Final Fantasy game should be, doing what they knew an FF game should have without any of the reason for it being there. And this game doesn't do that. This game is back to the more older school way of the way Final Fantasies did things mechanically. Obviously, it's a very different game with a real-time combat system and things, but in terms of how much player choice it actually gives you and how it seems to respect your choices and your input as a player is much better than the other 2 games, and that's why I actually have been enjoying it a surprising to myself amount, much more than I thought I would. The other thing to say is the time management isn't as bad as you might think. It's still very important, and you're definitely not going to be able to do everything on one playthrough. That's for sure. And, in fact, like I said, with the game kind of mechanically, like they put thought into the mechanics, another example of that is quests give you different rewards in New Game Plus, if you've actually done the quest before, and some quests are failable, by the way. So yeah, you might not even be able to complete them your first time through if you didn't know what to do, but second time through you'll know what you did wrong and can do it differently. And things like accessories, for instance, as in not the cosmetic ones, but the ones that actually give you stats, a lot of them can actually be leveled up, and this requires you to find the same accessory again. So if you return to a chest or get the drop from a special last one or something for a second time in New Game Plus, it actually will change the accessory, level it up, and give it new abilities and statistics. Which, again, just shows me ways that they understand that the game mechanically needs to be different from the others, and it mechanically has a different theme with real-time battles and this time limit system, and none of it, although I'm not trying to say that it's all done masterfully well, none of it feels like a gimmick. None of it feels tacked on and like they didn't quite understand how to make the most of it. It feels like all of the mechanics align in the way that the game is designed, for better or for worse, and actually makes sense together. and that's just one of the things that impressed me and actually kind of led to me enjoying it more than I thought I would. You'll find that the battles are fairly tactical because although you're a one-person party and you can switch between those three schemata that you have customized at any time, you have 3 separate ATB bars, so using abilities uses a specific number from that bar, and any that you're not switched to at the time charge faster, so switching back and forth between them is very important. You'll notice that guarding is actually fairly important. Blocking attacks is actually possible now because, of course, it's real time. And just guards, the idea of blocking right before you're about to get hit by an attack, is important because it reduces the damage much more significantly than a normal block, but it also is actually a stagger condition on some enemies. Like, you'll notice those weird fish things I've been fighting, they stagger if you just block their rush attack. So you have to perfect guard it, they get staggered instantly, and you can do a ton of damage to them. Otherwise, they're kind of an annoying fight. And there's several other enemies that reward you for actually blocking in time. And you'll notice even instances in the previous trilogy, the previous 2 games in the trilogy, where there would be like a big cinematic attack that kind of takes control away from you to show you how bright and shiny this attack is. That still happens in this game, but even moments like that, you still have control over lightning, so you can still move out of the way, you can still attack, and more importantly, you can still guard. So the game doesn't expect you to just sit there and watch all the time. It is a real-time combat system after all, so an enemy doing a big flashy attack, well, pay attention, because when it's about to hit you, you can guard and perfect block it and feel awesome and continue the combat and not feel like control is constantly being wrested away from you to make the game say, hey, look how cool this shiny effect we put in is. Isn't it beautiful? And it turns out the game just has an air of respect for the player because of all these things that I've mentioned, much more than the other 2 games in the trilogy do, and I think that's why I'm actually gonna recommend it to people, because it's a lot more fun than I thought. Yes, as it turns out, the story is strange, and the time limit is odd, but it's implemented well enough for me to enjoy it, and as it turns out, Lightning Dress Up Simulator 2015 isn't actually a bad game. Not nearly like I was expecting, and I like it more than the other 2 games in the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy simply because of how well its mechanics are implemented and how fun its battles are, and how much that customization matters. It's just fun and kind of exciting to find new garbs, yeah, I know, and equip them and see what cool abilities they come with and what new synergies you can make with the attacks you have, and also, to be honest, the main quest lines are fairly interesting as well. They're not too bad. The 4 main areas each have their own main quest line and can be completed. The bosses actually level up, essentially, if you take too long, interestingly enough. That's another example of the mechanics actually kind of melding together. If you wait till later days to fight some of the end bosses of the main quest lines, they will actually be replaced with a plus or plus plus version of themselves that is much stronger and has better attacks and stuff and is more difficult. Because, of course, you yourself are expected to be more powerful by that time. So yeah, it's interesting, and all this kind of culminates in a recommendation for one simple fact that makes it very easy to recommend. It's $20. It's only $20, much cheaper than it was originally on release, and it comes with all of the DLC items and garbs if you want to use them, but you don't have to use them, because of course they are colossally overpowered most of the time. Not all of them, but some of them are, so you can use them if you want to. They're all there included in the game. It is enhanced graphically for the PC a little bit. It runs at a nice solid frame rate of 60, pretty much at all times, although sometimes in the city of Yusnan it drops for some reason when you're in a big crowd. I can't figure out why. And, the keyboard controls work fairly well. They're rebindable, and you can use whatever controller you want, and they'll work probably better for you, but at least the keyboard controls are fairly acceptable. And it does have mouse control. And, really, it's hard not to recommend it for that price, and that's not the Steam sale price or anything either, by the way. That's just its price. It's $20. In fact, on Steam right now, is it cheaper because of the Steam sale? Let me check. Lightning Returns. No, it is still $20. That's okay. And one of the biggest bugbears that most of the reviews had was a weird, kind of almost buggy implementation of the Steam Cloud that was causing it to act like always online DRM, so for some reason you had to be online to launch the game. They fixed that in a recent patch, thank goodness. So that shows that they do care. No longer do you have to be always online to play the game. That was fixed. It was obviously not the way it was supposed to be implemented, and it's now not a problem. So yeah, that's Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII 3. Whoa. It's better than I thought it was, and I have no problem recommending it for that price because the battles are fun, the story is interesting enough to keep me going, and the mechanics are implemented well enough to synergize with each other, and it shows to me that they actually cared about what they were making here. And I felt a lot better after playing a lot of it than I did the other two games in the trilogy, because, like I said, it just seems like it respects me as a player a lot more than the other ones did. So yeah, thanks for watching, everyone, and if you're interested in the game, of course, the link is in the description below. If you want to know anything more about it, feel free to comment, and if you didn't like the video, well, there's another button down there for that too. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.